Derek Sheridan from Rust Belt Basketball Coaches Network. Happy Monday. We hope you're having a great Monday. And today, Ryan Ripke, our newest staff member at Rust Belt Basketball, we're going to talk about the late, great Al Radlinski, who we just lost a week ago. And Al had touched so many lives in the great state of Ohio, primarily through officiating. But Al was much more than just a good official. Al was a great official who had that rare trifecta where he had a great knowledge base of the game. He had great mechanics as an official, but he also understood how to talk to kids and coaches. And that last attribute is vastly important in high school basketball. And it's something that we're really hoping the younger officials picked up on from the great officials who have retired recently. Rick Cafis, of course, losing Al, Mike Hampton, those guys who had been around Northwest Ohio forever and have recently retired. So Ryan came up with the idea of doing this to honor Al, which is a great idea because it's most certainly deserving for the Radlinski family. So Ryan, thank you for this idea.
Yeah, no problem. This was a situation. So Al had he'd been a substitute in a number of school districts in the area, and I know I think he's been to Maumee quite a few times. He's been to Delta a few times and Evergreen. I think Liberty Center, and so through that subbing, he developed relationships with us at PDY, but especially with me that I've been coaching, and as a head coach I had him do my games, and then when I was an assistant at Pettisville he did some Pettisville games, and just got to know him on a different level than what you normally would an official. And so my principal came to me and said, "Hey," he goes, "Al Radlinski passed away." And I was just in shock. And so I got online and just happened to notice that his viewing was that very day. And so thankfully, my calendar was open. And so after school, I made a trip into Toledo to give his family my condolences, and had a short little conversation with one of his sons and his wife. And on the way home, I was just thinking about the relationship that Al and I had, and the relationship that we had developed over the years, and just thinking about, as you and I have talked about, the relationships that coaches develop. And I thought this would be a really good idea for some kind of a podcast or a Zoom to talk about these relationships that are so vitally important in every facet of life, but also especially with coaches, who, as you and I have talked about, coaches all the time get caught up in X's and O's and wins and losses and things like that. And a lot of times the thing that suffers are the relationships. And so just thinking about that, and I just thought this would be a great topic for us to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's a great topic. Al had subbed at the buildings I teach in several times, and it was neat getting to know him outside of the basketball world. But the only other experiences I had with Al where we weren't necessarily on a court together was when he was officiating Maumee games, and we would sit down in our hospitality room and talk before the varsity game. And he's a good guy. He was quick-witted, really had a heart for kids, fantastic family man, and also had a long stint in the Army as a lieutenant. So just one of those guys who had so many different experiences. Went to University of Toledo and got 2 different degrees from UT, and just had so many different experiences he could share with people. And it was really fascinating listening to him, because those people who had been in the military at that time when he was young, which, during the sexual revolution, could possibly mirror this time better than any other time in our history as a country, other than before we had solidified our independence. But, those guys had such a wild upbringing through the military during that time period that I think they had a holistic scope of society in general that was really healthy. I think they learned how to deal with a lot of different types of personalities, a lot of different types of people. Of course, he grew up in Toledo, so he had a vast knowledge in dealing with people from all sorts of different lineage backgrounds and ethnicities, which I think is one of the big advantages of growing up in a city. So Al was fascinating to talk to, and was able to take all of that knowledge and all of those experiences he had had throughout his life and apply that to his trade as an official. And I think that's one of the reasons why he was so well respected by the players and the coaches in Northwest Ohio.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. So yeah, just kind of a way to kill two birds with one stone. Honor Al and have a good conversation about things that coaches can sometimes skip over.
Yeah, I think the relationship aspect is closely correlated, at least in my estimation, with the leadership aspect of not just basketball, but being in a leadership position for nearly any endeavor. But the relationship aspect that's so fascinating is everybody who you meet who is in a leadership position, or anybody whom you have the opportunity to learn from, all have a different way of creating those relationships. And that's what I find fascinating. Two of the guys who I worked with as their assistant had 180-degree differences in how they communicated with kids, but they both had the same thing in common. The kids might not have had a gigantic, overwhelming relationship, loving relationship with the coaches, but when they graduated, they certainly did. And that was something that I always found interesting, watching my dad and my grandfather when they were head coaches. So I agree. I think it's a vital aspect of what coaches do, and coaches who neglect those sorts of things, I think, end up in the long run hurting themselves and their careers.
Well, and their programs. I mean, and maybe that's the same thing as their careers, but yeah, they hurt their programs because some kids and maybe even some coaches decide, I'm gonna pass. I'm gonna maybe work on my spring sport, or I'm gonna continue on with my fall sport or something like that.
Right. Well, the thing about modern high school athletics that affects no matter what kind of school district you're in. Now, maybe it doesn't affect a Perrysburg, or for the people who are not from Northwest Ohio who are on this broadcast, your big suburban schools that are affluent, or even your small suburban schools that are very affluent, like Ottawa Hills, where we're at. It might not affect them as much, but you never know, because every family's different in how they put accountability on their children. So when you can go to McDonald's and with a signing bonus make $17 or $18
Yeah,
an hour
yeah,
for your first couple months, and your son or daughter also wants a car and wants to be able to drive it, so they need an insurance, they need to pay for gasoline, they need to pay for upkeep of the vehicle, all of those things, versus playing a sport. And basketball is typically this basketball, or whether it's boys basketball or girls basketball, you typically take the hit on that because it's cold during those times of the year, and that's when the kids can go out and work more, and plus pick up even more hours on their Christmas break. So I think anything a coach can do to lure kids away from that mindset and pushing them towards, yeah, you might have to wait till summer to get your car, but anything coaches can do to push kids towards that, or push people in that direction, I think is huge. And you look at as much as the state of Iowa is known for basketball and wrestling, but Iowa was one of the premier forces in America in girls basketball. The state of Iowa promoted it more aggressively than anybody else in the nation, even more so than California at that time. It exploded. People went crazy for girls basketball in the state of Iowa. And then that bled into Kansas, and that eventually bled eastward towards us. So we're going back to like the early to middle 80s. Now I talked to some of my contacts in Iowa who have been girls basketball coaches since that period of time, and they can't get a team. They cannot get a team. They can't find 8 or 9 girls who want to play because they're in small communities, and Iowa was spaced out demographically, so the distance in between communities was gauged upon horseback riding back when the state was formed. So those kids in some of those communities don't have anything around them. And if it comes between working and making some money so they can buy their clothes or their cars or whatever, I guess right now that's winning. And the volleyball coaches, I guess, have formed a coalition in that state where they're just not, they've decided we're just not going to share athletes. And so they're brainwashing these girls, even girls who are marginal at the sport, but it's a power thing. They want to overtake the state, and they're killing girls basketball. And out of all the states for this to happen, Iowa would have been last on my list if I was in a guessing game, because that's where this was born. And it went crazy when this came out.
Yeah, well, and you bring up girls basketball, and I just think, and I'm speaking from experience here. Coaching girls is difficult. You talk about, with guys. I mean, I can walk into a gym with a bunch of kids that I've never met before, and by the end of a 2-hour practice, I'm going to be, you know, being sarcastic with them. I'm going to be playing, making jokes with them and all that kind of stuff. And you know, there. I mean, you know how guys' relationships are. I mean, we are constantly making fun of each other and teasing each other about things. And as a guy, I can't do that as a girls basketball coach until I gain their trust. And even at that, I have to do that very carefully because we aren't wired the same. I don't know if you knew that, Derek. Guys and girls are not wired the same,
I had a
And
sneaking suspicion.
yeah, yeah. And so, as with girls, I could have a girl, like Abby Freeman or Maddie Mattimore, who, I mean, there are two girls that I coached that they were competitors and they were bulldogs. If you told them that they couldn't do something, they would set out to prove you wrong. And if you're in my way of a goal, I'm going to knock you over. But the fact of the matter is, the majority of girls are not wired like that. They are very relational. And so if they come out for basketball, the vast majority of them are going to come out for basketball because their friends are, or because they have a relationship with that coach. And, that's just something that I've learned in my 11 years as a girls basketball coach. But I also think it goes to any differences in people, whether it's the difference between, races, or even just city versus country, or nationalities and things like that. Like, you have to develop relationships with these people to get the most out of them.
Yeah, I think so. I think, you look at how to motivate student athletes, and to a certain degree, I think that has a lot to do with relationships. I think the coach's personality has a lot to do with it. I think kids pick up on that pretty quick, but I think you said something earlier that reminded me of my coaches was during practice or, game night, they were completely different people in the classroom or in the hallways, lunchroom. They were funny. They had typical coaches' sense of humors, and that's really when where you could pick up on why they got into a profession where they were going to work with young people. They had those special gifts of communication. They didn't want to be in a role with us if it didn't have to do with our sport, where they had to be uptight and fickle and maybe in their alpha male or alpha female complex. So it was always neat to see them outside of that world. I never had to play for a coach who was in coach mode every minute of the day, when at least at school when we were around them. So I don't know what that'd be like.
That is something that, as we talked about, as competitors, that's hard for a lot of coaches to do, is to not be in coach mode, like, I mean, one thing that I always tried to do, as a head coach. Now, as an assistant coach, it's a lot easier, because I'm not the one in charge. But as an assistant coach, I tried to make myself get away from the game during the month of August. Actually in July and August, and then after tournament ended, through the month of March, I just tried to get completely away from the game. Tried not to think of it as much as I could, and just kind of unplug for a while. But even during the season, I'm seeing these kids, in the hallway or in the lunchroom or things like that, and Like they already think that I'm 100% basketball, and there's not a whole lot that's going to change their mind. But when I see them in the lunchroom or in the hallway, I've got to talk to them about other things. Talk to them about their grades, talk to them about their conduct in class, and things that they're doing on the weekends and things like that. They've got to see that I think of them as more than just a basketball player.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think one of the things I learned the most as I got older, both teaching and coaching, is players see how their coaches treat, and primarily the head coach, because you hit the nail on the head. When as an assistant coach, forming relationships is much easier because the kids need the assistant coaches to be on their side for to a certain degree. And I'm not saying going against what the head coach says or anything like that, but that guy who can say, no, don't listen to how he said it. This is what he means,
Right. Yep.
just and help the kids figure the head coach out. But players pick up real fast on how the head coach treats other teachers in the building, how they treat the custodians, how they treat the people who work at the ticket gates, the people who are at the scores table, the person operating the scoreboard, the public address announcer, the other team's coaches, the other team's
Well,
players.
yeah, exactly. That's what I was just going to say. The other team's players, and I had written down, you know, a bunch of relationships that I felt like coaches need to develop over the years, and honestly, I had forgotten about custodians. I had forgotten about bus drivers to my fault. But obviously, your players, their parents, your assistant coaches. One of the things that I'd always try to make sure that I did was give my assistant coaches a voice after practice, after games, to let the kids hear someone else's voice, to just say that, hey, this is what they're noticing. And maybe it's something that I missed. But yeah, opposing coaches, opposing players, and obviously, as the main topic of this Zoom is, officials. Because the fans pick up on that, and I'm sure you've seen games where the fans will react accordingly to how the coach reacts to the official. That doesn't necessarily mean that if I'm calm, if I disagree with Al on a call, and I'm calm about it, that doesn't necessarily mean that the fans are going to be calm about it. But at the same time, when I react negatively and when I react kind of inappropriately, the fans pick up their intensity.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that was one of the reasons why I sat on the bench, or if we had chairs out during games more so than standing. I found by sitting, I was a lot more even keeled and had a better vantage point to get to my assistant coaches. Everybody's different, but I do think also, as someone who's 6'6", a lot of officials, just by me standing, and maybe if I barked a couple times, they might, especially if they had never worked at one of our games before. But I just found that sitting for me was a lot better avenue. But yeah, I think the other thing too is our students, just the kids we have in our classrooms, they pick up on all those things too. They pick up on how we treat custodians, how we treat the person who teaches across the hall from us, whatnot. I know kids pick up real quick on who coaches like to be with. At Maumee, when we had things going really well, the football coach, the baseball coach, the wrestling coaches, and the basketball coaches, girls basketball, we were as thick as thieves, and we really enjoyed each other's company, and had a lot of great evenings together as a group at Capers or somewhere where our spouses are with us. And of course, you go anywhere in Maumee, it's like you and Wasion, you're going to see a lot of your families. And it's good for those people to see us out of school as well. It's good for the kids to see us with other coaches, with other teachers. I think that's an important aspect of being a coach. I think the
Well,
parents need to be able to see us too as people who are humans and not robots.
yeah. Well, and I think, talking about, relationships with opposing coaches, I think that our players feed off of that as well. I mean, you know, you and I both know that when we were in college, there was a specific coach that Coach Platt did not care for, you know, and then there were other coaches that, I mean, he just totally had great relationships with. And the difference between the relationships we had with those teams were affected by coaches' relationships, you know. Um, I mean, I think of one of the biggest ones that I had a great relationship with Brian Ziegler, the girls coach at Archibald.
Good
Um,
guy.
yeah. And it was one of those things where, I mean, I respected the heck out of him as a coach. And it seemed like every time I coached against him, I learned something about the game, maybe about my response in the middle of a game or some adjustment that I had to make that maybe I didn't make. And I always picked up on that. And I always went into those games. I mean, I wanted to beat him so bad. I don't have many W's against him, but man, I wanted to win every single game so badly against him. But man, I had so much respect for him, and I think my players always picked up on that as well, and they had a respect for their players. Um, I think as a result, hopefully. So
Yeah, I think that's a great statement. I know one of the things I picked up on a clinic when I was really, really young is Dick Bennett was speaking at a clinic in Wisconsin. He said he learns something from another coach during the game, and maybe that's something he said, even if they exploit something that we do in such a way we haven't seen before, he said there's a separation now between coaching types. Some guys are going to be really sensitive and take it personal and act like a jackass to cover their, to lick their own wounds. And he said, the way I do it is I shake their hand and tell them how much I'm thankful for what they just taught me. Thought, man, that's really good, because how true is that? How true is that? You think about guys like Dave Boyce, for example, who have had all this success. Jim Rucky's another one who both those guys already have one foot in the Hall of Fame. Tim Reiser, another guy. Those are the type of guys who would stop after a game and say something like, "Hey, Derek, that was really good today. You guys really have improved, and you showed us something. Blah blah blah." And versus some other coaches who aren't like that and do things the alternate way. But that's a great way to build a friendship right there, because if the people who have coached in the Northern Lakes League know it's a really odd environment. It's the only league I ever coached in where the coaches don't talk before a game. You stay on your side. They don't want to talk. And where in Indiana and the other leagues I was in Ohio, it wasn't that way. Coaches had a pretty good relationship, but you know, my point being, before I went off the rails, to crack the nut to get into be a friend with Dave Boyce. That's how it started. He acknowledged something we did, and then the next day I called him in his office and said, "Hey, I appreciated that." And then, even though Maumee and Perrysburg is one of the most bitter rivalries in Northwest Ohio, we still to this day have a great friendship. And Jim Rucky's the same way. Um, Tim Reiser was that way. I'm sure I'm forgetting a lot of people. Matt Smith at Swanton is another great example. But I think the coaches who exemplify the willingness to acknowledge other coaches go above and beyond in showing younger coaches, but primarily their assistants who want to move up the ladder, on how the proper way to build a relationship with another coach is.
well, and you know, I kind of had a season about halfway through my time at Delta where the light bulb just kind of went off. And all of a sudden I started seeing things really differently. Um, and one of the things that happened to me This book, Lead for God's Sake, what I started doing was I took 15 minutes at the end of practice and I read the girls like a chapter or chapter or two, and what happened was, like I said, my thinking just started changing because I kept reading this book and I had read it probably 4 or 5 other times. But when I started reading it aloud and having discussions with my team about it, all of a sudden I'm like going, holy cow, like I was this guy. Like this book could have been written about me and my life, And in that season, I had read something somewhere that said we have to stop looking at officials and opponents as being adversarial. Like all they're doing, like your biggest opponent is yourself. And what you're trying to do as a coach is you're trying to get your kids to maximize their potential. Okay. And that may mean for some teams 2 wins. Other teams, that might mean a state championship. For most teams, it's probably going to be somewhere in between. But what happens is when you play a team, regardless of whether you win or lose, and more times it's when you lose, what happens is a spotlight is shown upon your weaknesses and the things that you need to work on. And so, we started going into the locker room, after the game and saying, okay, we know what we need to keep working on, right? And this is why we're doing practice the way we do it. This is why we're working on the things that we're working on, is because what happened was Wasion just showed us that we're not very good handling the press, or we're not very good at shooting free throws or whatever, and so that really kind of changed my approach as well. Is once again, going back to the officials, um, anytime an official made a bad call before this season, it was that guy's trying to screw me over. He's screwing me over. Like I'm trying to win this game,
Mhm.
and this guy is standing in my way. Well, that's an unhealthy approach. He's calling the game, and one of the things that I learned in getting to know Al, and I knew this, but it's not until I developed the relationship with Al that I realized that these guys are working just as hard as we are, and they want to do as good of a job for everybody involved as well as they can. They're in it for the kids too, just like we are, um, and so that whole approach just took on a different meaning for me.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I think my days as an athletic director also had a lot to do with you know pre athletic director Derek Sheridan versus post athletic director Derek Sheridan were two very different people in regards to how I treated or how I talked to officials. Um, Finding out one how hard it is to hire good officials. Good officials, once they've reached the status in the coaching world where they are getting 5 stars on their reviews, kind of like Uber drivers now, they're hard to get consistently. And to boot, the good officials are not going to put themselves in a scenario once they've earned this right. They're not going to go somewhere where they know, or they're not going to take a job where they know the administration is not going to support them if it's a crazy environment. If this place is known to be nuts, they're not going to go there unless there's a strong-willed administration who's going to handle that for them. They've earned the right not to have to work in those places. And you talk to officials 15 years ago, and their main thing was getting to the level of the Mike Hamptons or the Al Radlinskis, the Tom Donovans, the Rick Cafases, that level where you're going to be in that you're going to have the best game of whatever league your focus is that week. If you're in the NLL, you're going to get the Perrysburg Maumee game. If you're in the TAC, you're going to get the Ottawa Hills Cardinal Stritch game. If you're in the NWAL, you're going to get Ryan Ripke's Delta versus Archbold. You're going to get those games. And now, when I talk to officials, especially my role with BCSN, where I help with broadcasting, is they don't put as much of an emphasis on the game now as the location. You know, they'll sign up for every game at Perrysburg where they know they're going to be protected by that Perrysburg administration. And they base things now on, you know, where can I go where I'm going to get support? Bowling Green, for example, they will line up in droves to umpire or referee at Bowling Green because the Mike Black will walk up in the stands and tell people it's time to go, and he takes two police officers with him, and they stop the game. And my wife and I, now that we live in BG, have seen it twice. They All the official has to do is point, and those people are gone. And unfortunately, officials now are experiencing a heck of a lot of places that don't treat them that way. You know, TPS, for example, is having a heck of a time getting qualified officials because a lot of those games, there's not an administrator on campus during the facility, which I think is a crime.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I can't imagine a school not having an administrator on site, especially, at a football game or a basketball game. I mean, the,
mhm.
never, never heard of that, but
Yeah, you know, there's so much information now on social media about parents fighting with officials, and then we read articles, or we hear people say stuff like, well, they're making, you know, $80 a game now. I can't believe we're in a shortage of officials. And my comment to them is, so you're telling me you're okay with somebody calling you everything but a nice Protestant male for 2 hours of your life, and then after the game, you've got to worry about someone attacking you.
yeah, we're following you out to your
Right,
car,
exactly.
you know. Yeah.
And those are the things that are happening now, unfortunately. And anyone who says those things don't exist has not been to a high school game in years. You know, it's go to any park in the summertime where there's a softball, baseball, or softball or soccer tournament, and you'll find out what parents are like.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, parents have this, and I don't know if this has changed or not. I think it's more vocal, it's louder now than it was maybe even when I played. Is parents think it's a way of showing affection to their child by acting like a
Yep.
train wreck on the sidelines, when all it does, in fact, is embarrass the child. Now, you also got a faction of people who do this because this is their way to get back at the system. But here's something I never understood, and I think anybody who teaches now would agree with me. And there's not many things in our line of work people agree with unanimously, but we have a massive issue with bullying in public education. And I think one of the best ways to prevent bullying, at least on the varsity or the school-based athletic teams, when the players see a coach help a custodian or talk to a custodian the same way he talks to the baseball coach who's across the hall from him. They have a great dialogue. You know, they're talking, they're laughing before practice. They see the coach give the custodial staff Pettisville basketball gear. And the same with the bus drivers, the same with the lunch ladies, the same with the secretaries, the same with the paras who are in the classroom. And kids see that, okay, this guy is most certainly not taking advantage of his seniority or his, um, for a lack of a better term, his better job placement, or, you know, the better salary, whatever. And I think that goes further in stopping bullying than anything. When now we're always going to have kids who are inept, who are going to try to push that envelope because that's how they've been raised.
Right.
I guess I'm talking about the masses more so than just one or two of those unique individuals.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Well, and I was even going to say, the notoriety, the the coach who gets on Big Board Friday, Friday nights or Saturday nights or whatever, how does he treat the other people? How do talk about, how does he treat the algebra teacher, the physics teacher, the like you said, the athletic secretary, the school secretary, so yeah, I think that's huge. I think that's huge as well. So
Yeah, I know one of the things I found throughout my career, primarily as a head coach, was our students, the kids who didn't play. They really find it interesting on how coaches treat just our students, the kids who make up a mass majority of our paycheck, the kids we have in class. And if you can win the student body over, that doesn't mean being the guy who lets them have pop in the room when they're not supposed to have pop. No, I'm not talking about that. But you win them over with your competency and your communicative style and your support. You take a kid who struggles in a subject, and you help that kid get a C or get a B minus or whatever, even though they don't play basketball, and you're spending time after or before school with them. Kids pick up on that real quick, and that's a great way to get butts in the seat on a game
mhm.
night.
Well, and what I was going to say, and I'm speaking of this as from experience as a coach, but also as a parent. How are you treating those kids who were in your program for a couple of years and then decided they're not going to be in your program anymore?
Mm-hmm.
You know, your players pick up on that as well. Because I think what that speaks to them, and what the message I always tried to communicate to those players, to my players, but also to the players who decided to step away from the program, was you still matter to me. You still matter to me. You're still a person. I still value you. And I think those players pick up on that, and they see that the message he's sending us as a coach, he's really living it, or she is really living it, and that speaks volumes, and that gets buy-in. So
Well, you just hit the nail on the head. You're living it. One thing, high school kids as well as adults, I think high school kids pick it up maybe even better as adults than adults do sometimes, is the hypocrisy level in
yeah.
any leadership position. Saying one thing and then being seen not practicing what you've said you stand for. Those are great ways to turn people off faster than pretty much anything, especially with kids. But going back to the bus drivers and the lunch ladies and the secretaries, all of those people, Don Meyer used to say it better than anybody, build your own army. And then I said it jokingly at a clinic years ago when society had just started to maybe take uh, a sharper angle towards the other direction. I said, build your own infantry because you need it now. And I was kind of a Yogi Bearism, I guess, but it kind of caught fire. And I still stand by that statement when I talk to coaches. You're not in a position now where you need to build an army. You need to build an infantry, a well-trained infantry. It's what you need now with social media. You need people who are going to support you even when you're not around. And when it comes from the bus drivers and the secretaries and the other teachers, that's another huge aspect. The other teachers and the custodial staff, the athletic training staff, when those people are supporting you as you support them, that's a great step in building your own infantry, because now the kids don't have anywhere to turn in regards to finding people who are going to badmouth the coach, because that's like trying to find ants on your driveway in the summer. That's not hard to do. Any coach in any community, you walk into the local pub or the local McDonald's at noon, or better yet, at 6 a.m. in the morning, walk into that McDonald's, and you're not going to have a hard time finding people who think differently or think that we're jerks or whatever, the parents of children we've cut or whatever. Or just
Well,
it's a parent who doesn't like the way we do things, or the grandparents. So finding those people's easy. That takes no talent. But when the community knows that there's a big there's a support base of school-based people and non-school based people, I think that's huge.
Yeah. Well, and I was going to say the one guy that I probably learned that lesson the most from was Coach Platt. Um, you know, my dad was that kind of a guy as well, but as a high schooler, I really wasn't picking up on a lot of that stuff, but then I went to college and I started playing for Coach Platt, and it's like going, you know, he's treating everybody the same way. I mean, it doesn't matter, like you said, whether it's a janitor, a bus driver, an opposing coach, an opposing player, or even a janitor from the opposing team. You know, he treated everyone like they were the most important person in the world at that time. I mean, he truly valued them, and I just learned so much from him.
Yeah, as did I. I think another aspect that was important for us with Coach Platt was we got to see his relationship with his children. Ty had just taken his first head coaching job at Southwestern Hanover, and his relationship with Peggy, I think that was very important for us to see because I know one another thing high school kids pick up on is how the coaching staff treats their own children and treats their spouse. That's something that I know when I was a kid I picked up on real quick. Um,
Yeah, I
so
think those relationships that we've talked about. Um, I think I could probably have a story about Coach Platt for each and every one of those things. I think about in 2000, my first year of coaching, and we were headed to our first national tournament, and he asked Paul Patterson, Taylor's Hall of Fame coach, to come talk to our guys about what to expect. And we sat down with Coach Patterson, and he flat out said, he goes, if you're going to be successful, here's what you got to be able to do. And it wasn't even X's and O's. It was you could be playing at 8 o'clock in the morning, or you could be playing at 9 o'clock at night. You're not going to have a full 20-minute warm up in between games. You're not going to have a regular locker room. You're going to have to show up to the tournament site in your game gear and all that and just all this. And I just remember that thinking to myself, wow, like, who's this guy that he would be willing to do that? But that's that relationship that he had with some opposing coaches.
oh, I think
Um,
it yeah, I
you know,
agree.
I think of another story, and this isn't a story. This was a story that was shared with me by one of our teammates. But he ran into a player from another conference school well after graduation, and this guy looked at him and said, "He goes, I was standing there at Huntington North High School. He goes, I was recruiting a kid from I think their opponent, Huntington North's opponent, and this was an African American kid, and he goes, I'm standing there in Huntington North High School where I am the only person of my skin color standing there. And he goes, all of a sudden I sensed an individual come up beside me, and he goes, I could tell. And this guy was not a big kid. This guy was not a big guy. And Coach Platt, as you know, 6'8" probably, he goes, I could tell this was a very large man that came up beside of me. And he goes, all of a sudden, he puts his arm around me and, says, hey, how are you doing, buddy? And they just start talking. And he says, I, I've never had an opposing coach treat me like that, as, while I was an opponent and even as an opposing coach. And, that's who Coach Platt was. And like I said, a lot of what I know now, I learned from him.
Yeah, I can say the same. He was very unpredictable, which is one of the things I liked about him. What I mean by unpredictable was unpredictable in what you were going to see from day to day, not just with practice planning, but with also with how he was going to motivate us this day. There were some days he was very quiet. and didn't say much. And then there was other days where he was very animated, and I like that. I like the fact that he had the ability to coach us in different gears, and that's something I took from him. Um, I really like the fact also that the day before a game, he didn't kill us with a lot of information we didn't need. He let us compete a little bit, just enough. He let us get, sweaty, play against each other just enough, and then got us the heck out of the gym,
Mhm.
um, without making us, watch 2 hours of video. That's one of the things the guys who I grew up with were lucky enough to play Division One. They dreaded the day before games, dreaded it. They're going to watch 2 hours of film in the morning. Then they're going to go to a weights where they're going to do a lot of yoga stretching and plyometrics. And then they're going to go through their walkthrough. And the assistant coaches are going to have phone book sized dossiers of all the sets they've got to show the kids. And they've got every name of every set. And, uh, I was so glad that because my high school coach, who I love, was like that, and I love Coach K to death. Would never say anything bad about him as a great coach, but I like the fact that Coach didn't do that to us.
Yeah. Well, he he focused on us for one thing. I mean, I don't remember going through that much of a scouting report um with Coach Platt. I mean, it was all about us. And I think it was probably your senior year, my freshman year, and we were low on numbers that year. And if I remember right, if that was the season, the day before games, we'd go for about 45 minutes. I mean, there wasn't a lot of fluff in the practice. It was, hey, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to go hard for 45 minutes to an hour, and then I'm going to get you out of here, and you're going to go to the dining commons, eat supper, get back to your room and study. I mean, he was great about valuing our time.
Yeah, the only times we really went overboard on what the other team did is if they played zone or pressed. Those were the times I remember where he spent a lot of time going against what the other team did. But I think another thing you said that's interesting is relationships with other coaches in your league are what makes the league really strong. In
Mm.
leagues, you look like I think the Northwest Ohio Athletic League is great for coaches' relationships. I think it was really good when Matt Smith was coaching and Corey Sproul. Those guys all seem to have just such a tight knit league. And it was good when I was coaching there. The coaches were very accommodating. Um, but you talk to the coaches down the MAC and the WBL coaches, they've got their own mafia. They don't give film out to other leagues. They
Yeah.
or they didn't. I don't know if they're on mandatory film exchange now or not, but and that's the way it was in Northwest Indiana. If somebody from downstate requested film and a region guy traded film with someone from downstate, that was a sin. I mean, you were going to wear the scarlet letter A. We didn't trade film with downstate teams.
Yeah.
Uh,
One that brings up a story of mine. I think it was my first year coaching, um, and Archibald had won the district, and Liberty Benton coach called me up and said, "Hey Ryan, can I get a tape from you for Archibald?" And I made the comment. I said, "You know what?" I go, "They're from our conference. I'd rather not give that to you." And he said, "Okay, that's fine. I understand that." The next year, I was sharing that story with Brad Myers, who was the girls' coach at the time, won a state title with Wasion. And I was we were talking about something, and that story came up, and Brad looked at me and he goes, "Ryan," he goes, "I appreciate what you did." He goes, "But the one thing you got to understand," he said, "right now," he goes, "we're allowed to trade film." He goes, "You never know when you're going to need a tape from them." come, sometime in tournament. You might need a tape from them, and you got to keep that in mind. And I appreciated that so much coming from a veteran coach to a new coach. Now, what we did later on, a few seasons later, was we as a league, then we said we're not going to trade film, which, okay, that kind of throws that whole thing out the window. But that kind of, gave me a safety net to say no. But like I said, Brad was willing to go out on a limb and give me some good advice that just said, you never know. You got to keep the bigger picture, in hand. So Brad Myers was another good coach that somebody that I, really valued any conversation I got into with.
That's great. That's great. Yeah, it's with more and more leagues having the mandatory film, which I'm not a favor of at all. I'm not on. I'm not. Or have I ever been on board with that? I think it. I think it makes coaches' jobs easy. What I mean by that is if you see that crew of guys who are still going, like Jim Ruckey, Dave Boyce, Jeremy McDonald from Northview is another one. They still get out and go to games and scout live, and to me that always meant something. And for a coach to have that now availability without having to earn it, I just had a hard time giving it to him. I just that was just my personality. I got to give this to a guy who I haven't seen out scouting all year. And I know, Murphy's Law, or people would say, well, there's no guarantee they're going to watch the film. That's not just about that. It's about the principle of the thing. Why should I have to give them something? They haven't done anything to earn this.
Yeah. But that goes along with also with developing relationships. I if I know the coach, if I get along with the coach, yeah, I'll be happy to give you film because I know you and I know what you're made of. Um, I mean, I got a whole list of coaches here that coaches that throughout the years, just getting to know them, um, just made coaching more enjoyable. A guy that was Ayersville's girls coach when I first started coaching, and now he's Napoleon's coach, Craig Cicero. Ashley Oyer, she's the boys JV coach at Wasion, but she was the girls coach at Wasion there for a number of years. I mentioned Brian Ziegler, Jeremy Terwilliger. He was Anthony Wayne's girls coach for a few years. Kirk Jones, who he was Defiance's girls coach for a number of years. Todd Grosjean, who just made a trip to Dayton in the Final Four just a couple of years ago. Eric Stantz, he was at Bryan before Todd. And then I mentioned, Brad Myers, just, coaches that, that we get it, and we understand that we're in the struggle together, and that they understand what I'm going through. I understand what they're going through, and regardless of wins and losses, or regardless of the outcome of the game, it's one of those things where after the game, we, like you said, we know we can shake hands and maybe give a little hug, and we know that that we're going to see them down the road and in better times, and where we don't have to be against each other all the time.
Yeah, that was the thing that stood out about Northwest Indiana more so than anywhere I coached. The coaches in the Calumet region are special. They take care of one another. Um, the game still matters in the region, and the coaches there are really tight knit. Come game night, you say hi, how's it going? Talk about your kids or whatever, and then after the game, we all go to BW3s or whatever with our wives, and the wives sit in their area, and the coaches sit and talk about their games, and we congratulate those guys who had good nights, and the older guys who have retired, they're there with their wives too. and the coaches' wives, the retired coaches, sit with the wives and they help them. And they help them. And now the husbands aren't around. So the wives now can talk about, how did you do this? How did you raise three children with your husband gone all winter? And the older coaches are walking around talking to us and talking to like Beaver Marcinek, Jim McDonald, all these legends, Nino Muffaletto. They're sitting down with us and they're talking about what they saw if they were at our game, or they want to know what they can do to help. Well, what hurt you tonight? What did you go against? What hurt you? And they start asking questions, and then before you know it, you've got to ask the waitress for more napkins because everybody's been writing on all these napkins, or even like what the purpose of this is. Well, what did the kid do? What did he say? What did he say to upset you? You benched him. I saw you yell at him or whatever. And those are the guys who have experienced it all. They've experienced all of it, and they talk to us. And well, you know what? Maybe next time with this kid, sit him on the bench and let your assistant talk to him, and you just stay out of it. That way, you don't get distracted, and there's not a big scene, and everybody doesn't see this scene. Your AD doesn't want to see that, nor does your principal. And those are the type of things that I needed. I know there was three of us. It was Russ Marcinek, myself, and Adam Paytai, who were all the same age and who were all head coaches in the old Lake Athletic Conference, and we needed those guys. We needed them. Those guys were great for us, and they are still great for me. Jack Gaber, for example, Jack Gaber calls me more than anybody just to ask how I'm doing with my health issues, and just to talk politics, and just to talk about where he's at in life, and what he watches now on TV in regards to basketball and coaching, and so those relationships um, are extremely important to coaches, and one of the things that bothers me, it really bothers me a lot, are the young coaches now are interested in what, I don't know if it's social media. I don't know what's made it change, but they're not interested in getting together in groups, and having older coaches befriend them. Dick Kroll and Bill Axe, Dick Kroll and Bill Axe would drive all the way out to Delta to watch us practice and critique our practice. They would critique our games, and we would get together afterwards with our wives, and what we did for them. And I never thought of it this way until I went golfing with Dick and Bill, and they said, you guys keep us relevant. We want to still be active with coaches, and you guys keep us relevant. And I never thought of that, and or I've never thought of it like that. But I think those guys have such an important role in coaching, and not just coaching, but also teaching. But you look at our clinic attendance, in-person clinic attendances are all-time low. Young coaches just aren't into that, and I don't know what I can do, or what we could do, I should say, to motivate them, to be more inclined to have mentors, and create more of a coaching community.
Yeah. When I got the job at Delta, um, that summer I was at an FCA thing, and I ran into Manny May, Waite's girls coach, and they've fallen on some hard times, but he had just won a state title with a girl. I think her name is Natasha Howard. She was Miss Basketball, and she ended up going to play at Florida State. And I said, Manny, I go, you got any advice for me? I said, other than getting a Division I girl on my team. He looks at me, he goes, Ryan, I didn't have just one Division I girl. He goes, I had 6 Division I girls. I said, okay. Do you have any advice for me other than having Division I athletes? He goes, yeah. He said, get yourself an assistant coach who's been around the block, a retired head coach who you trust and who's not afraid to tell you what you need to hear. And he goes, that's what I got for me. And he goes, that's the piece of advice I'll give to you. And so, I ended up running into Larry Bruce, who is a Hall of Fame coach himself, from Morenci High School in Michigan. Um, and he helped me out my first 4 years, and it was incredible. Just, he ran my defense, and that was kind of one of his specialties when he was a head coach, was a matchup zone, and then a zone press, and so he ran that for me. And you know he tried to teach it to me, and he tried to teach it to the next guy that came up behind me to be my assistant coach. And I'm telling you what, we couldn't teach it. We just couldn't teach it. But and I just remember when he stepped down, thinking to myself, what am I going to do? You know, like I felt like, the training wheels were being taken off my bike, and I'm like kind of freaking out. But I mean, all along he had kind of prepared me, like, you can do this, and it took me a couple of years, but I finally, you know, kind of decided, okay, I looked at my then assistant coach, and I said, listen, we can't try to do it Larry's way anymore. Like, that that was Larry. You know, we've got to find our own way to do things. And I ran across the run and jump defense, and we implemented that, and we had some great success with that. Um, and it was just one of those things where, yeah, the training wheels came off. Like, how some cultures teach kids how to swim, they just throw them in the water, and they figure it out. We figured it out. But getting that insight from an old veteran coach was huge for us.
Oh, yeah, I agree 100%. I know the worst season my teams and I ever had, we had a year that had a lot of things go on. Uh, a lot of bad things happened, but we just won a very minuscule amount of games. And we won our first game, and Beaver Marcinek called me after the game, called me at home, and you would have thought we just won a state championship. He was so excited that we got that monkey offer back. Um, and the support those guys gave, not just Beaver, but Jim McDonald, all those guys was so so nice to have coaches of that caliber who are so willing to support young coaches. And it all stems to their love of the game, and it stems from them wanting kids being coached the right way. And I think those are two very powerful mechanisms that we need to find ways to keep alive in this game.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Um, yeah. So, I mean, yeah. Well, and I think just relationships, just they keep us healthy. You know, um, I think, you can talk to friends of yours that aren't coaches about some of the struggles that you're going through, and they can listen, but they really don't understand what you're going through. I've got a friend that, I mean, anytime, I start talking coaching with him, he looks at me and he goes, I don't know how you do it. And he goes, there's no way I could deal with kids. And as much as I appreciate um his honesty and the compliment that he gives me, it's like going, sometimes I just need to talk to another coach.
Yeah, I understand that. I know on those lines, one of the big dividers right now between coaches, and I'll just give it to you in story format, is you've got the coach who's a teacher, and they're worried about the kids' grades. They're worried about them, the social aspects of their education, worried about you know everything but the kitchen sink in regard to these kids, versus the coach who's not a teacher. And this just happened to us, or to me, here this school year. I was sitting at Capers, And there's another basketball coach who's been all over the place in Northwest Ohio, and he's had a heck of a lot of success. And but when we talk, um, I will say something like, "Well, these kids need to really focus on their grades." Well, I could care less about that. That's not my. I'm just hired by the school to coach them basketball, and I'm with them 2.5, 3 hours a day, and that's it. But so I'm not worried about that stuff. Those are all school issues. Well, I think the basketball team's a school issue too. I think those kids are a school issue, and that stuff just drives me bonkers when I hear somebody say that. It's terrible for those kids, and it's also terrible for our sport. So,
Well, it's terrible for the profession.
uh,
I mean, because and I mentioned this, at the beginning, and I'm glad I could come back to it because I can kind of explain what I meant. But you're going to get the most out of a kid by investing in that kid. And when I mean getting the most out of him, it sounds kind of transactional, like, okay, I'm going to invest in this kid because I want something from him. Well, as I said, the book Lead for God's Sake, it talks about transformational leadership. Like, okay, do I want to win basketball games? Yeah, I do. Okay. But as a coach, what I should want more is to invest in that kid and to make a meaningful impact on that kid. Now, as a result, I think I'm going to help him maximize his potential, and I'm going to help my team maximize our potential. But the ultimate goal is not necessarily winning and losing. It's being there for that kid, and Tom Held always talks about how, the greatest paycheck or any coach could ever have is an invitation to a wedding of a former player. He calls that payday, and, you know, that's going to be a lot more meaningful and a lot of more impactful than maybe a state championship, because that trophy is going to get put up on a mantle and it's going to collect dust, and that banner is going to get put up, and yeah, people are going to remember it. We're going to have great memories of it, but the memories are really going to be why you got invited to that wedding, you know. Um, and so that when you're investing in that kid, it is the grades, but it's also maybe the behavior that at home, the behavior in classroom, the behavior, outside of the four walls of the school, and, out in the community, things like that. Like, when you're investing in a kid, you're investing in developing that whole person, not just the basketball player, not just the football player.
yeah, it's the old guys say, when they say this guy's in the life, this guy's in the life, the coaching life. Those are like the biggest compliments those older guys can give a coach, and what that means is everything you just said. Those are the coaches who get invited to weddings. They get invited to graduation parties. They get invited to bar mitzvahs. They get invited to, um, the baptisms, or when a kid, gets through catechism. Those are the types of things that are payday. And that's also one of the reasons why we do it. I think, as a coach, it can be a very lonely profession. It can be a profession that's not kind. Greg Campy says it best. It's a profession that's like quicksand. It's ever changing. Every minute's different. It's a tough job, and to have a support base of people, and that support base was created by um, working together with them in areas that don't involve money, high school athletics, for example. And those kids support the coach. and you've transitioned from coach to player relationship to friends. I think that's something very few people get to experience that is very gratifying.
Well, and one thing that I started telling my kids too was, you know, winning's a lot more fun when you do it together, and losing is a lot easier when you do it together. Now, we talked about being invited to a guy's wedding or a gal's wedding, or like you said, baptism, bar mitzvahs, all that kind of, but at the same time, if all we're investing in is the athlete, then who does who does that kid turn to if he loses a parent or a sibling or a grandparent? Like, we have lost a huge opportunity to be there for that kid during one of the toughest times of that kid's life, if all we're doing is treating them as an athlete. I remember, I coached football, so Pettisville High School grad, no football team, but I got to coach football for 1 year for Nate Ruppel. And you talk about a coach who gets it. You talk about a guy who's in it for the right reasons, is Nate Ruppel. But I was coaching football with him for one season, and we had scheduled a game with Central Catholic's freshman team, and so I went down with the freshman team, me and two or three other coaches, and we ended up beating Central Catholic's freshman team, and that was just a huge victory. I mean, it was awesome. It was a great night for those kids, but it was also a great night for the program. Um, but it was the next day that one of those freshman kids and two of his older brothers lost the mom.
Hmm.
And the way these coaches rallied around these three boys was huge. And as a result, the players rallied around, because just like we said, players feed off their coaches. And these three boys, all three in high school, playing football for Delta football, had a huge family of players and coaches that they really didn't realize until that happened. Um, and if it weren't for Nate Ruppel and his leadership, like I said, that would have been a huge opportunity that was lost.
Absolutely. That's the way it is, you know. Um, you look at the relationship to this day Brooks Miller has with Jerry Kiefer. Jerry being Brooks's high school coach, and Brooks lost his father, and
Yep. Yep.
it doesn't take much to understand how much Jerry means to Brooks, and vice versa. So
Yep.
it's I read it in one of the newspapers here recently. It wasn't the Blade, and it wasn't one of the periodicals here. It was somebody had said, it mentioned that coaching is a very atypical job. The hours spent, small pay, and listed a lot of really good points. But whoever authored this article also said, when done correctly, the relationships that are built for a lifetime are also atypical for a job such as coaching or teaching, working with young people. Um, I know one of the things I've got to witness, selfishly speaking, is when my grandfather Price passed away a couple years ago. And he was a World War II infantry vet from Okinawa, and was a high school basketball coach and a high school football coach, and he coached track. He was an athletic director. He was an assistant principal. Had just such a great experience in public education, but listening and watching the emotion that his ex-players who are now in their 60s or 70s have when he passed away was shocking. Um, in the memories they had of playing for him back in the 40s or 50s was shocking. So that article really did mean a lot to me in regards to how true it is. It's an atypical job, and it also provides a lot of atypical rewards and a lot of heartache. Yeah, that's something else coaches
Mhm.
um, need to know going into this. The amount of heartache this line of work brings is at times can be suffocating, and
Yeah. Yep.
I think that's another reason why we need the relationships with other coaches and professionals.
Yeah.
So show us
Yep.
your PowerPoint here. This is something I've really been looking forward to.
Okay. Let me share my screen. Can you see it? Nope, not yet.
I
There we
can
go.
now.
Okay.
Yep, there we go.
Okay. So Al Radlinski. All right. Was born in 1949 and he passed away just a couple weeks ago. These numbers I thought were pretty staggering. He was a basketball official for over 50 years, a volleyball official for 45 years, a football official for 21 years, and a lacrosse official for 8 years. Um, and in fact, his health started turning for the worse in the middle of a lacrosse match this spring. He was subbing one time this spring at Delta, and I asked him how lacrosse was going. He said, "Well, I haven't officiated a game since I passed out in the middle of one."
Yeah.
I go, "Al, what are you talking about?" And he ended up passing out, and he went to brace himself, and I think his elbow slammed into his ribs, and so he broke a couple of ribs, and he messed up, I think, his wrist a little bit. And that kind of started the downward spiral for Al. Even though it wasn't a downward spiral, I shouldn't say that, but he passed away as a result of the complications of that. He was a Golden Whistle Award recipient and officiated numerous playoff games and state championships. He was the secretary for the Northwest Ohio District Basketball Association for over 30 years. And this next one was something that he talked about all the time. He loved every spring. He loved talking about the Glass City Marathon, which he was a staff member and a volunteer for over 25 years. Um, and then this came directly from, well, all this information came directly from his obituary, but this was quoted. It was in Allen's nature to give back to his community. During his lifetime, he donated nearly 20 gallons of blood to the American Red Cross, was on the IRB board at Toledo Hospital, and volunteered at numerous church festivals and events. And in retirement, he was a substitute teacher, taking over 120 assignments a year. And that's really where I got to know Al. Um, in my experience with Al as an official, um, you know, as as my coaching career started off, my this was kind of my experience with most officials, pretty adversarial, and Al was no exception. I remember one game. Um, Man, I was so frustrated. We were losing to Swanton, and I think that year we had lost to them twice, and I think that might have been the only two times I lost this. Or my teams lost to Swanton, but I was so frustrated, and I looked at Al and I said, "What are you watching? You need to call a foul right there." And he actually got right up in my face, like Tom Izzo is up in JD Collins's face right there, and he says, "Ryan, you need to settle the frick down right now." And kind of like a little child who was sent to the corner, I kind of, put my arms to my side and looked at him, and my bad. But as I got to know him as a substitute, as I was officiating, I like this picture because I'd still be kind of chirping at him and barking at him every once in a while, but it was a lot different once I got to know him. And then finally, this picture down here, oh crap, I can't remember this coach's name.
Archie Miller.
Archie Miller, yes. Um, you know, Eventually he and I got to the point, there where, even when he was officiating, we were still friends, and, I could disagree with him and he could disagree with me, and he'd tell me why he made a certain call and things like that. Um, and so, this last bullet talking about the lessons I learned throughout my journey. I mean, like I said, these officials, you know, they're not paid off by one school or another. You know, they don't care who wins. Um, they really are in it for the kids. This is a way for them to give back to the sport. They chose to officiate. They chose to sometimes in some situations, these guys will travel 2 hours away from their home, you know, spend an evening away from their family, multiple evenings, and in the case for Al, I mean, he coached sports in every season. So he's doing this, 8, 9 months out of the year. Um, you know, he didn't do it for the money. He did it because he wanted to stay involved in the sport, and he wanted to be a part of something special, high school sports, So so yeah, all these things, and everybody hears the comments, you see the comments on social media, you hear the comments in person, like I said, this guy must be getting paid off, or which one's his grandson, or which one's his son, or whatever. Listen, these guys, you know, sure, just like in any profession, there's some bad apples, but the vast, vast, vast majority of them are good people. Um, and so, these are some books. I already mentioned Lead for God's Sake. That's a book that I've read multiple times. Um, these next two coaches, there are these next two books I came across. I'm not even sure how I came across them. I think maybe on social media. And it was funny, Nate Ruppel, when I told him I was reading this book, he goes, "Man, that's a perfect book for you." And I said, what are you saying about me? Confessions of an Imperfect Coach. It's once again, this is another book that I thought, man, this could be written about me, because like I said, I'm definitely an imperfect coach. Um, this book here, The Captain, by a guy by the name of Jamie Beckler. I don't know, Derek, if you've ever heard of him, but I've gained a lot of insight from reading some of his stuff, and then hopefully through RBCN, I'm hoping that maybe I can share about some of these other books. Tuesdays with Maury, awesome book. It's a book that I've read a couple of times. It's a book that I've given as graduation presents. Another John Gordon book is The Hard Hat. Um, 21 Ways to be a Great Teammate. I really like that book. I went over that book with one of my teams. Here's the other book that I haven't talked about yet. You Win in the Locker Room First. That's by John Gordon and Mike Smith. Mike Smith used to be the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons. And then lastly, this was a book called Season of Life. And I can't remember who gave this to me, but it's a great book. Joe Ehrman, he was an NFL player back in the 70s and 80s, and he is now, I think, just an assistant coach at a private school. I think maybe somewhere on the East Coast, maybe Maryland.
Yeah, he played at Syracuse.
Okay, yeah, and he, just talks about how he invests in the kids that he coaches, and tries to be a positive influence in their lives. And like I said, some of these books I'm hoping maybe we can discuss further through RBCN, and I would highly recommend any of these books to any coach of any sport. I wouldn't go to a library to get them, because most of these books you're going to want to read multiple times. And so I would get on Amazon or something, and I would buy your own copy. It might even be a copy, as we talked about older coaches. It might be a situation where you want to buy that book for a younger coach, to invest in that guy's life or gal's life.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, this is good stuff. I think we're on to something really good here. Thank you for sharing that with us and creating that slide. That was outstanding. But yeah, we will definitely 100% start focusing more on leadership and positive leadership from RBC, and for sure. And you and I will talk about that more. I've got notes all over the place. and we'll put everything that we have in a boiling pot and boil it down. And then, of course, you're welcome at any time to jump on and talk about the books you're reading and what they've meant to you and your takeaways. I think that's a very valuable asset of any organization, is being provided with that type of information, even just finding out about something for other people to pursue. But I sure appreciate your time today, Ryan. This is outstanding, and I'm so happy, and so we're so lucky to have you on our staff. Now that we're just getting the ball rolling here for RBCN and growing this thing. So I'll be in touch with you sooner than later, and I've got a whole list of things here we can talk about. I don't want
Sounds
to
good.
I don't want to kill your afternoon, so we'll get together soon and start hammering some of this stuff out. But thanks a lot, my man.
Yep. Yep. Thank you, Derek. I appreciate it.
Okay, I'll talk to you soon, Ryan.